Good morning. It's Mrs. Snyder, and I'm sure you are wondering what in the world this video is. It is before the sun comes up on Friday, and I'm still in my robe and jammies, so I figured that might not be fun to watch. So instead, I came into Zach's old bedroom, and the video is pointed towards Legacy, so you guys can kind of watch the cars going up and down Legacy this morning. I don't know if you remember, but I live in a neighborhood right next to Legacy Christian, and that means that the back of my house, I can look at Legacy Drive and get to see the cool, amazing sunset that God paints every day for us, and that also I can watch cars or see people out walking. It's the best view ever, and I can see Allen Elementary too. But this morning, I'm going to be reading to you guys from Humphrey. And I wanted to make sure that I got to read that in before the day gets going because, guys, it's a busy day. All right, I'm about to get started. Sit back and enjoy. I was proud of myself, but my joy didn't last long because when I looked over at Thomas, he was staring at his desk and looking about as unhappy as a human could look. "Class, get ready for a ton of fun," Mr. E announced. I wasn't in the mood for fun, so I crawled into my sleeping hut and had a nice dream about Phoebe's daisy watch. When I awoke, I thought I was having a bad dream. In fact, I thought it was a nightmare. They were decorating, and I didn't like it. "I'll bet this is the best decorated room in all of Longfellow School," Mr. E told my friends. To squeak the truth, he was probably right, but I don't like pumpkins like that when they cut their faces. Ew. "Don't forget, the fun is just beginning," Mr. E reminded the class. "Eek," I squeaked again, as if my paws weren't already full of problems. Humans just don't realize how much a classroom hamster has to do. After school, Mr. Morales came into the classroom. "Nice decorations, Ed," he said. Mr. E looked very proud. Mr. Morales took a piece of paper out of his pocket. "Have you got a moment?" "Sure," Mr. E said. The two men sat in some student chairs. Grown-up humans always look funny sitting in those small chairs. "How have things been going with the class?" the principal asked. "Great," Mr. E said. "The kids are the best." Mr. Morales nodded. "Yes, and I can tell they like you a lot." Mr. E smiled, and I think his red hair glowed a little brighter. "But there have been a few problems," Mr. Morales continued. "Yes, there have," I squeaked. "Problems like Phoebe, Harry, Kelsey, Simon, Rosie, Holly, Thomas." I know that all that principal heard was squeak, 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 and it made him laugh. "Yes, Humphrey, I know you're listening," he said. Mr. E cleared his throat. "What, problems?" The principal looked down at the paper. "Well, Mrs. Wright has complained about some safety issues, some injuries, a problem with noise, and a problem with students roaming the halls during class." "Oh," Mr. E said. "I guess Mrs. Wright and I don't see eye to eye." Mr. Morales smiled. "Mrs. Wright does like to follow the rules, but rules are there for a reason after all." Mr. E nodded nervously. "Yes, I understand." If he understood, why didn't he follow them then? That was part of the mystery of Mr. E. "And a few parents have called to say that they're concerned about a lack of homework," Mr. Morales continued. Mr. E chuckled. "I'll bet the students haven't complained about that." "No," Principal Morales replied, "but we are here to teach the children. I believe learning is fun, but there's work involved too." Mr. E nodded, and nodded some more. He looked so nervous, even his red hair looked pale. "And then there's Mrs. Brisbane." Mr. Morales wasn't smiling anymore. "She's wondering if you're keeping up with her lesson plans. She said you haven't called her with questions." "Oh," Mr. E said. "Well, I've been following the lesson plans, but adding my own touches." Maybe I haven't been following them closely enough. At least Mr. E was honest. I like that about him. The district-wide math test is coming up. Are the students prepared for that? Mr. Morales asked. Not completely, Mr. E said. Not yet. Ed, I want to give you a chance. You're a new teacher, and I know you really want to continue, Mr. Morales said. But the learning comes first. It certainly does, I squeaked. Boing, 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 Og agreed. Are you letting me go? Mr. E asked. No, Ed, Mr. Morales said. I think you could be a good teacher, but I need to see a change starting tomorrow. Yes, I'll change, Mr. E said. Thank you for giving me another chance. I won't let you down. The two men shook hands, and Mr. Morales left. Once he was alone again, Mr. E began to mutter something I couldn't understand. I did hear the word failed. I know my fellow classmates don't want to fail. Maybe teachers don't want to fail either. After a while, he got up and paced around the room. Don't give up, I squeaked. I was trying to be helpful. I guess Mr. E heard my squeaks because he looked my way. I'll tell you one thing. I'm not giving up yet, he said. He sounded very determined, which gave me hope. Take out the lesson plans, I squeaked. In the binder. In the drawer. I didn't think he was likely to listen to me since he thought of me as an it. But surprisingly, he marched over to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out the binder. He stuffed the binder into his large sack. Then he came over to the table where Og and I live. You have it easy, he said. You're just classroom pets. Everybody loves you, and you don't have to worry about tests. Then he stared out the window. His shoulders slumped. He sighed once or twice. After a while, I couldn't stand it. You can do a better job, I squeaked. Try. Mr. E looked down at me and almost smiled. Would you like to switch jobs with me, Humphrey? He asked. I think it was the first time he used my name. I could sit in your cage and take naps, and you teach the class, he said. I was sorry to hear that he thought all I did was sit in my cage and take naps. But then he didn't know about the lock that doesn't lock. I really like my job, I squeaked. I was too polite to say I didn't think Mr. E would be a very good classroom pet. I really like my job, Mr. E said, and I want to make this work. I want this to work too, I replied. Just then, Mrs. Mack walked in. Why do good things always happen when Mrs. Mack walks in? Hi, Ed, she said. How's it going? Mr. E sighed. Not very well, I'm afraid. What happened? Mrs. Mack asked. Mr. Morales just told me there have been a lot of complaints about my teaching. Too much noise, not enough homework, and Mrs. Brisbane doesn't think I'm following her lesson plans, he explained. Are you? Mrs. Mack asked in the friendliest way possible. Mr. E shook his head. Yes, and, no. Mrs. Mack said, Oh. She came a little closer to my cage and leaned down. Hi, Humphrey, she said with a wink. I really want to be a teacher, Mr. E said. There were no job openings, so I signed up to be a substitute. That's how I got started, Mrs. Mack said. Yes, and if she hadn't, I wouldn't have my wonderful job. I've never told anybody what happened, Mr. E said. Mrs. Mack smiled. I'm a good listener. Mr. E nodded. Okay. Listen up, Og, I squeaked to my neighbor. Maybe we'll solve the mystery of Mr. E. Boing, boing, Og agreed. My first day as a substitute was a nightmare, he said. I tried to teach the kids, but they wouldn't be quiet. Wouldn't sit down, wouldn't listen to a word I said. When I tried to give them homework, they threw paper wads at me. What? I squeaked. That was rude. Boing, boing, boing. Og was as shocked as I was. Mrs. Mack was surprised too. Was that at Longfellow's school? She asked. No, Mr. E said. I tell you, I was ready to give up teaching forever. And I decided the next time I got an assignment, I'd make everything fun. If the kids liked me, maybe they'd behave better. I understand, Miss Mack said, but you can have fun and learning at the same time. Students can have respect for you and like you at the same time. Look at Mrs. Brisbane. Yes, look, I squeaked. I wish I knew her, Mr. E said. This is such a great class, and I don't think I've lived up to her standards. But it was so awful to know that the students in that first class didn't like me. You'd think I've learned it by now, but sometimes I forget. Teachers are humans. I have an idea, Miss Mack said. I'm going to stop right there. Till next time, guys. Love you.